Welcome to Walk in the Shadows, Series 1, Episode 4 of Noisy Spirits, the Poltergeist Phenomenon, with me, your host, Tim Woolworth. This is the final episode of the Noisy Spirits series. If you want to hear more, there are bonus episodes for our Patreon subscribers to listen to at their leisure. With all topics we cover, the Walk in the Shadows bonus episodes expand upon the concepts in our episodes. Access to our bonus episodes and several other perks are available for less than the cost of a single book. This show requires a lot of resources to explore a topic, and I want to sincerely thank every Patreon supporter who helps make it easier for me to procure the necessary books and journal articles through your support. Without you, this show wouldn't be possible. We want to make the best show that we can with our limited resources. So if you would like to support what we do here, please visit our Patreon. The link is in the show notes. If I may have one more ask before we get to the good stuff, like and subscribe to our podcast. If you really vibe with what's going on, please leave a review and tell a friend or two. It really does help. And now, let's wrap up our exploration of the Poltergeist phenomenon. If you've listened to the first 3 episodes of the Noisy Spirits series, you should be well versed in the major aspects of poltergeist lore. We have explored seminal cases that have shown the various ways that a poltergeist manifestation may present itself. You've learned the concept that a focal person using uncontrollable psychokinesis somehow creates the eruptions that are person-centered, not place-centered. We've also seen how psychology can be utilized to remediate the poltergeist episodes. We have delved into various experimental methods that have been used during a manifestation to understand the phenomenon better. Finally, you should be familiar with the term recurring spontaneous psychokinesis as a definition designed to remove the stigma of the spirit, the Geist, from these types of paranormal events. In this final episode of the Noisy Spirits series, we are going to dig into one more truly fantastic modern case file, and then add some closing thoughts to help round out your knowledge of this phenomenon. We've had some great poltergeist case studies up to this point, but this next poltergeist eruption had some very credible witnesses, thereby making it one of the most fascinating cases of the last century. The poltergeist eruption I'll cover occurred in the small Polish town of Zakopane, high up in the Tatra Mountains and close to the border with the Czech Republic. In January 1985, the head nurse of the Jashinsky Academic Rehabilitation Center, Kristina Kolak, was on her way to see a new patient. The medical facility had a new director, Dr. Gajula, a renowned surgeon and vocational rehabilitation specialist. Dr. Gajula had requested that a young lady be admitted just 2 days prior, and Nurse Kolak wanted to get acquainted with the patient after having a couple days off. The girl wasn't just any patient. At 15 years old, Joasha Gawinski was known throughout Poland because the press had reported frequently on the strangeness that surrounded her. Objects were witnessed moving in her presence, and she could bend a metal object by simply stroking it. When Nurse Kolak arrived, she had a brief conversation with the ward attendant in the hall just outside Joasha's room. She reminded the attendant to wash the mirror in the bathroom across from Joasha's room, number 309. As they chatted afterwards, there was a loud crash and the sound of breaking glass from Joasha's room. As Nurse Kolak rushed into the room, she saw a whirl of small glass fragments rise up from the floor, come together in the air, and form a line. This line of glass flew at Nurse Kolak as if she were a magnet attracting them. Kolak was showered with glass particles, and Joasha simply said, "Better not come in now." Kolak brushed herself off and looked at the medicine cabinet over the sink. The glass was still there. The attendant called out from the bathroom across the hall. The mirror and the fiberboard that attached it to the wall were gone. It had simply vanished off the wall. Looking again at the glass shards on the floor of Joasha's room, Kolak saw that there was fiberboard laying underneath the mess. By all appearances, the mirror and its mounting from the bathroom across the hall had transported itself to Joasha's room, shattered, and attacked the nurse. This may sound crazy, but both women were professionals who had been employed by this facility for years. And I'd like to remind you that the teleportation of objects is quite common in poltergeist eruptions, as are flying objects. The other thing I'd like to draw your attention to is that glass has been the focal point of poltergeist eruptions in several cases I've covered in this series so far. It was due to events such as this one that Yawasha wound up being studied by Dr. Gajula, and that study was to continue at the Ashinsky Academic Rehabilitation Center. 2 years prior, at just the age of 13, Yawasha's grandmother died. Yawasha loved her grandmother very much, and after her death, she became detached from the rest of the family as she grieved. It was about 2 months after her grandmother's death that the first poltergeist eruption happened. Her father worked a late shift, so Yawasha was home watching TV with her mother and grandfather in their small apartment. After her mother went to bed, both Yawasha and her grandfather fell asleep in the family room. About 3 a.m., a straw mat fell off the wall onto the grandfather, who was sitting on the sofa. He tried to put it back up on the wall, and it seemed to resist him. He persisted, and it flew out of his hands and began to move around of its own accord. The grandfather thought Yawasha was playing a trick on him, but he looked, and by all appearances, she was asleep, but not for long. Mere seconds later, the plates and glassware in the kitchen lifted like they were being handled by an unseen entity. Then they were unceremoniously flung in multiple directions around the home, shattering. There was a loud pounding that rattled the walls and shook the windows. Matches from the kitchen lit on their own and floated, on fire, to different areas of the room. The grandfather struggled to put them out before they created a destructive flame. A good portion of the shattered glassware flew directly at Yawasha, and she was cut in several places. All three ran upstairs to the neighbors out of fear. The upstairs neighbors, a married couple with the surname Yak, were already awake because of the noise coming from Yawasha's apartment. When the family described what had happened, the Yaks thought it was a joke of some sort. The Yaks and Yawasha's family went downstairs and witnessed the destruction that had been wrought. They waited, and nothing happened. All 5 persons went upstairs to the Yaks' residence, and after some time, there were noises from the downstairs apartment once more. Mrs. Yaks and the grandfather stayed behind, while everybody else ran downstairs. Jan Yaks said the following in an interview for a Japanese television program when he was asked by the reporter if he had seen objects flying. "When the racket downstairs started up again, I returned there and saw glasses, plates, pots, pans, and a lot of other objects smash into the wall. The noise was unbelievable. The objects were not flying, only when they hit the wall. Nobody was in the room. Mrs. Gajewski and her daughter were standing with me in the doorway. Those dishes must have been flying incredibly fast because you could not see them until they fell." Back upstairs, Yawasha complained of a bad headache, and it was noted that she was feverish. She had been in normal health when she had gone to bed hours earlier. Some tea was brewed, the 2 families sat down at the table, and everything calmed down. It remained calm until Yawasha's father arrived home from work. He had been called by the mother, but he thought she was having flights of fancy. He tried to take time off work to attend to the emergency, but he was required by his employer to remain until the end of his shift. When he arrived home, he saw the destruction as he opened the door. When he crossed the threshold, a stoneware crock flew off the shelf and traveled across the kitchen, all the way over into the parlor, and then shattered forcefully on the floor. Much like the other remarkable cases we've covered, it wasn't long before professionals were brought in to figure out what was going on. The first was a doctor who came to examine Yawasha for her fever. He was aghast at the condition of the home. The doctor demanded to know which member of the family was responsible for the condition of the home. He then refused to help and left without treating Yawasha. The neighbors were very cautious around the family, as they could hear all the sounds coming from things breaking daily. A city engineer was called, and over the phone he stated that it was likely just building subsidence, which is when the weight of a building causes the foundation to slowly sink into the ground over time. Subsidence can disturb how level shelves may be, and create noises like pops and booms. The engineer did not think it was worth coming out to the home to investigate. Eventually, like many of the other cases we've covered, the police were called in. They worked in shifts and stayed in the home. On the second day of their presence, Sergeant Slowick witnessed glasses, screws, and other objects flying through the house. He saw these objects exit the kitchen, make a 90-degree turn, and slam forcefully into a wall. After this, the police called upon the city engineer to come investigate the state of the building rather than assess the situation over the phone. The engineer found that there was no subsidence nor construction defects present within the building. With other city officials, the engineer went up into the apartment and witnessed a mustard jar fly off a shelf and slam into a wall. Remarkably, they also witnessed broken glass shards on the floor raise up and fly towards Joasha's hands. Word got out, and the whole town was abuzz. The deputy mayor arranged for the family to obtain new housing. Upon moving to a new location, the chaos continued, unabated. It was shortly after moving into their new house, a few weeks after the initial events, that Polish scientists became involved, including Dr. Gajula, the aforementioned physician at the start of this segment. In addition to Dr. Gajula, a psychologist, a biophysicist, and a metallurgist were all dispatched to the apartment. If you are curious as to why a metallurgist was on the scene, it is because Joasha had the ability to easily bend metal by some unseen force, much like the internationally famous Uri Geller. They found that as a teenage girl, she was normal in all regards with a couple of exceptions. She had warm thermal spots around her fingers, toes, head, and solar plexus. Her body temperature would fluctuate rapidly across her entire body. Finally, she would build up a static charge that was exceptionally higher than that of a normal person, but more importantly, the static electricity would not discharge from her when she was grounded, which is contrary to how static electricity works in the human body. In addition to the measurements, the research team witnessed poltergeist eruptions in action. Objects flew about. They observed, documented, and unanimously agreed that Frog could not be present. This was made concrete when an armchair floated up and moved around the room, with Joasha sitting in it cross-legged. They asked her to climb out of the chair, which she did, and the chair continued to float. The research team tried to hold the chair down, and much like her grandfather experienced with the straw mat, they could not bring the chair down. On one other occasion, a rolled-up blanket moved across the room, unrolled itself, and then covered up Dr. Gajula. As for the metal bending, she bent cutlery with ease, but she could never do it when the camera was upon her. Most of the events would not occur within the camera shot, and those that did often caught only the hint of an object's trajectory. Around the time of the events, very brief flashes of light were often seen on the film. Dr. Gajula took a personal interest in the case. It was Dr. Gajula, if you recall, that was later the director for the Yashinsky Academic Rehabilitation Center, where he brought in Joasha 2 years after the initial poltergeist-type events to study her in a controlled environment. After the mirror event we opened this case file with, 2 days later, staff heard what sounded like an explosion coming from her room. When they arrived, they saw that the sink had been smashed into hundreds of pieces. The metal water lines and drain pipe had been precisely cut at the elbow, and the metal supports for the sinks were destroyed. The events carried on at the medical center until Dr. Gajula ran out of money for the investigation. Joasha went out into the world as a young adult, and objects remained in motion around her. In 1987, there was another major furniture event that was witnessed by people who lived in the same building as Joasha. Then the poltergeist eruptions simply stopped. This case had several of the hallmarks of poltergeist infestations. More importantly, the events continued for at least 4 years from the initial event, and the events were able to be observed in a medical setting, which is very rare. After this short break, we'll go into just how common poltergeist events are, and to help put everything we've covered into context for you. Poltergeist cases, while still very rare, are more common than you think. A French researcher conducted a quick survey in 1951 of available police and newspaper files from between the years 1925 to 1950. To his surprise, when looking at all the data, he found that there were hundreds of individual reports over that 25-year span. In the 1970s, Alan Gauld, a psychologist, analyzed 500 poltergeist cases. Dr. Gauld, who at the time was a psychology professor at the University of Nottingham, and who once served as the president of the Society for Psychical Research, wrote extensively on hypnotism and mediumship. When he analyzed the data from these 500 cases and published the results in 1979, the data revealed quite a bit about poltergeist eruptions. He classified the eruptions based upon 63 characteristics found in the case files. I'm going to throw some numbers at you here, but it will be brief, I promise. Gauld found that only 24% of the cases lasted longer than a year. 58% were most active at night. 48% involved rapping sounds. 64% of cases involved moving objects in general, and 36% of the cases involved moving significantly large furniture such as chests, tables, chairs, and beds. Only 12% of the cases involved the opening and closing of windows and doors. 10% involved significant structural damage or breakage. 16% of the cases had voice communication from the entity. 16% involved cases of assault, including pinches, blows, scratches, bruises, and bite marks. There was fraud in 8% of the cases, and only 1% of the cases involved natural causes. The meta-analysis also revealed that in poltergeist cases, the focal agent was predominantly a female who was under 20 years of age. But of the 500 cases that he studied, he found that the 20th century had revealed a larger increase in male-centered poltergeist eruptions. Finally, it should be noted that most poltergeist cases ceased within 2 months, and many within just a few short weeks. I would also like to point out an experiment conducted by University of Cambridge engineers that helped to rule out natural causes in poltergeist eruptions. The study had nothing to do with poltergeists. Instead, it was designed to measure and understand how various external disturbances would affect items in a house. One can easily see how such research is critical for understanding how earthquakes, volcanoes, and a host of other issues can affect a standard home. These researchers ran an experiment with a demolition ball and a house-shaking machine on a housing project that was slated to be demolished for an updated development. They found that when force was applied to the home that was sufficient to crack walls and have parts of the ceiling rain down upon the floor, while these forces were absolutely devastating to the structure of the home, it was fairly innocuous to the items in the home. For example, a round marble that was marked on the floor and a matchstick left teetering on the edge of the mantel were undisturbed despite mechanized shaking and wrecking balls. Considering that cases of poltergeist activity mostly contain motion of small objects, those skeptical of the poltergeist phenomenon often point to natural causes such as undetected ground subsidence or undetected small earthquakes. The Cambridge experiment produced enough evidence to create doubt about natural causes being to blame at least 99% of the time, according to Gauld's analysis, especially when the meta-analysis showed that in the 10% of poltergeist cases that had significant structural damage or breakage, such as doors or windows, there was no structural damage found in the houses themselves. After all these cases, it's time to break down the manifestations themselves and how they often progress throughout an eruption. One will often find low-volume noises as a starting point in a poltergeist case. There may be little scratching sounds like mice in the walls or a bat crawling its way from an eave into your attic. These sounds will be slight, skittering, and a mild annoyance that may have you looking around with a flashlight or calling your local exterminator to root out pests. On occasion, it may be a bit louder to get your attention, like an animal pawing at your door, and of course, when you open the door, nothing is there. Over a brief period of time, these noises will often grow both in intensity and or frequency. As we've already discussed, raps and thumps are a telltale sign that a poltergeist may be gaining strength. The sounds are loud, like someone physically knocking on the doors, windows, walls, or even furniture. In addition to these noises, you may hear some sounds like a heavy ball being dropped and rolled across the floor. As with the binging case, these noises can grow to wall-shaking thuds that originate from everywhere and nowhere. Stone throwing is a telltale sign that a poltergeist eruption has moved into a more serious haunting. As we've discussed, stone throwing is so commonplace with poltergeist eruptions that it has garnered its own name in paranormal research. Lithobolia. The size of the stones, or other objects, and the frequency at which they are thrown vary from case to case. Even though the stones often materialize out of thin air, they are often taken from the surrounding area and somehow mysteriously reappear as apports in motion that cause mayhem. When a rock has been thrown by the poltergeist, it is typically hot to the touch. Stones aren't the only thing that move. Most anything in the house can move in position and/or location, even the heaviest of furniture. It is often found that small, necessary, or easily noticeable items are moved with more frequency. This often includes objects like kitchen utensils or jewelry. As we found in the Miami poltergeist case, it is exceptionally rare to see an item start its motion, but the results of the motion are far from rare. Items can be broken and even strike people, as seen in the Baltimore and Zakopane poltergeist cases. Even rarer than moving objects is the creation of apports. Apports are items that appear out of the air that do not belong, such as a rain of stones inside the home, or in the case of the Battersea Mystery House, coal, pennies, and potatoes can appear from thin air. There have been apports tied to poltergeist cases, hauntings, and even in some seances. Apports are a complete mystery, so be it stones, coal, potato, or gems, they are certainly cause for careful observation and documentation of the situation. Most communications with humans from the entity is through a series of raps in code. 1 rap for no, 2 raps for yes. Through this method, lines of communication can be set up and answers can be obtained. In a small amount of poltergeist cases, there is a gradual build-up to vocal communication. The voices will typically start out as very gruff and beleaguered. Over time and ensuing communication, the voice will become more understandable, but it is almost never in a conversational tone. Witnesses and researchers often write of a poltergeist voice as being very stilted and staccato-like. It is as if the poltergeist gains its own voice through practice, much like a toddler learning to talk. Once they have a voice, the poltergeist likes to shock. It will tell hidden secrets, use copious swear words, insult, and generally make for a roommate that you no longer want to share your flat with. More often than not, the poltergeist will lie about people and things to get a reaction. In reference to themselves, the poltergeist adapts how it wants to be viewed to get a visceral reaction from its audience. A murdered person, a jilted ex-lover, a ghost, or a rumored haunt at the location or nearby are all fair game when talking to a poltergeist. They can be the most horrendous person who lived, or a victim that horrors were inflicted upon. When the claims are reviewed, they are almost always found to be completely false. In fact, a poltergeist almost never has information available that is not in the possession of at least one of the witnesses. Every good story builds to a climax. So too does a poltergeist eruption. The prior stages build in frequency and intensity until they hit a peak where the activity is at its most horrific. This can last for several days before the pressure breaks and starts to decline to a level that was before the climax. During the decline, the phenomenon will gradually fade away in reverse order, losing its voice first, and then the rest of the stages until there is a complete cessation of events. Typically, the decline leading up to the cessation is much quicker than the build-up that preceded it. More often than not, from initial events to climax to decline and the cessation lasts less than 2 months. It always appears at the center of turmoil, knocks, raps, flying objects, water, moving furniture, objects exploding, etc., is a living person. Most often this person is an adolescent and very rarely beyond their teens. Various researchers have speculated that the teenager has a spirit entity that attaches to them and causes mischief. Others believe that the eruptions are strictly due to the psychical abilities of the focal person. We simply cannot know at this point in time. Poltergeist cases do not seem to have a physical entity that is seen, but whatever causes the activity can certainly be heard, such as in the binging case. As there is no corporeal entity responsible for the eruptions, and the incidents happened around a single person, It is highly likely that RSPK is the cause of this activity where the focal person is the source of the PK energy. That being said, this raises some questions that need to be answered about RSPK. What is PK energy? How is it being manifested? Can it be controlled by the focal person? Why can't everybody do this? Hopefully, future research will yield some results that will answer some of these questions. Distance is also an issue that was not considered before the Miami poltergeist. When Julio was present, the activity occurred. When mapped out, most events were within 10 feet of him, and at further distances from Julio, the events dropped off precipitously. This is also observed in other forms of energy, such as sound and light. Take, for example, this podcast. If you are listening through speakers, your perception of the pressure waves that create sound are subject to something called the inverse square law, a basic concept in physics regarding energy dispersal. Basically, the intensity of a force changes in inverse proportion to the square of the distance from that force. For every doubling of the distance from your speaker, you lose about 6 decibels of volume. Being 4 feet away from a speaker means that you lose about 12 decibels. Try it. Walk a few paces and listen, then a few paces more and the volume will get lower. When we take this under consideration with the case of Julio, Dr. Roll's mapping of the event pointed out that the PK energy that radiated from the focal agent is subject to the same law of energy dispersal. The psychokinetic energy couldn't reach much past 10 feet from Julio as it dispersed, with very few exceptions. Regardless of the specifics of the unknown PK energy, there almost always seems to be a tension in the home life of the focal adolescent. There's a theory that if the adolescent can express anger in the typical outburst befitting of a teenager, and that hostility builds while simultaneously being repressed, it can manifest explosively. Thank you for your time spent walking in the shadows with me. I know your time is valuable, so I really appreciate you being here, in this moment. This episode was researched, written, and produced by me, Tim Woolworth. The audio wizardry is courtesy of our engineer and fellow explorer of the unknown, Joshua Shawn at Zero-G ITC. Hopefully this episode made a little bit of our paranormal world more normal for you. As always, if you have any personal anecdotes, observations, or alternate explanations you would like to share on this or any other topic we've covered, or just maybe you would like to drop a note to say hi, you can always reach us via our email, contact@walkintheshadows.com. Once again, that's contact, spelled CONTACT, at walkintheshadows.com. If you think what Walk in the Shadows offers is a valuable service for sating your paranormal curiosity, hit subscribe and review this podcast. And please, tell a friend. It really does help. If you want to learn more about this podcast or myself, please visit our Walk in the Shadows website. The link is in the show notes. On our website, you can find all of our social media accounts, our mailing list, and our Patreon should you decide to support us. Your support not only gives you benefits like ad-free content, bonus episodes, access to our Discord server, exclusive free merchandise, Ask Me Anything sessions, and much more. It also helps us keep high-quality paranormal content delivered regularly to the podcast player of your choice. Until next episode, may you and yours be healthy, prosperous, and treated with kindness by everyone you meet both in the light and in the shadows.